125 people.
Hello, good evening, everybody. Welcome to our regular Tuesday evening, our deep dive where we've got to, at least I've got to exercise my brain a little bit because it takes a little bit of focus and concentration sometimes. But it's all fun and it's enjoyable. And we've been learning about the largest organ of our body, which is namely the skin, because it's actually quite a fascinating thing about everything that it does and doesn't do. And our skin can tell us a whole lot about what our inside is doing as well. It can tell us if we're sick. It can tell us if we have issues with certain organs like the liver or pancreas, etc. It can tell us if our gut bacteria is out of whack. All of these things show up in, through, and on the skin. But there's also a few other things that show up on the skin as well. And the skin also regulates things like our body temperature. So those of us feeling cold at the moment, well, that's when you add an extra layer of skin in the form of a jersey. But some of us don't do that because it's not quite that cold yet. So let's get going, pick up from where we left off last week. Okay, let's do this and hide these goodies. Okay, so we're talking about the skin, which is the largest organ of the body. And when we get going, we're going to go through some of the other fun things that happen on your skin. And these are, some of them are called fungal infections. So we're going to go through what they call the pathology connection. So there's certain conditions and things that show up on the skin. And one of them is a fungal infection. And one of those is called tinea, which is a general term for fungal skin infections. We also get fungal nail infections, but the skin infections are known as tinea. Usually located in warm, moist regions of the body. So I'll let your imagination run wild as far as that's concerned, but you also see them between fingers and between toes quite often, especially in areas like here in KZN in summer, where it's very warm, very moist, and people have to wear closed shoes. Signs and symptoms include things like cracking, weeping, and itching skin. You get different types of this, and the first one is tinea pedis, pedis meaning foot, and we know it as athlete's foot. And just like tennis elbow or golfer's elbow, you don't necessarily have to be an athlete or a tennis player or a golfer to get the various different conditions. And this athlete's foot is a fungal infection of the foot, and it is spread by direct contact with contaminated surfaces like locker room floors, which is why if you're in a hostel or a sports club, they will generally tell you to buy a pair of flip-flops and wear those in the shower so that your foot isn't exactly on the shower floor, which could be contaminated with this fungal. Most commonly develops in warm, moist area between the toes. As I said, it's often exaggerated for people who have to wear closed leather shoes, specifically safety boots. I see it quite often there. And then they're wearing socks and they have to work outside and it's 42 degrees in the shade and humidity is 120 degrees or 120%. And well, I'll let your imagination run wild from there. The other one is tinea cruris, known as jock itch, and it's a fungal infection of the groin and scrotal areas, and obviously mainly affects men. And it's aggravated by increased perspiration and tight-fitting shorts, pants, or undergarments. Then another one that we'll see is a thing called tinea corporis, or more commonly known as ringworm. And this is a fungal infection of the smooth skin of the arms, legs, and body. and its appearance is a red ring-shaped structure with a pale center. So almost like looking at a volcano from the top, from the air, and you've got this little ring. So it's a red ring with a pale center. So if you look at some of the latest scans of the typhoon or hurricane that's happening off China at the moment, or off Japan, I think, somewhere over there. It's been hitting the Philippines amongst other places. You've got this big circle thing with a little hollow in the middle. And that's almost like what a ringworm would look like. And ringworm is a misnomer because there's actually no worm involved. It just looks like a worm, and that's where the name came from. Then there's Tinea unguium, which is fungal infection under the finger or toenails. Quite often more under toenails than fingernails. I don't know why. Again, I suspect it's because of footwear. And if untreated, it can result in overgrown and thick nails with white, brittle appearance. And I see these quite often in my practice. Very, very difficult things to treat. And if you've got them, generally not painful, but not very nice to look at. And as I said, difficult to treat, hangs around for a very long time. Now, the next thing is bacterial infections. And one of them is called cellulitis. Not cellulite that we're familiar with, but cellulitis. Remember, the itis means inflammation. And it's an inflammation of where you would get cellulite, of the little cells just below the skin. And I do see these quite often as well. And if you have a nice full-blown case of cellulitis, you will land in hospital in the vast majority of cases because your leg balloons up, it becomes extremely hot and red and extremely tender to the touch, and you are not a happy camper. So you get admitted to hospital and they pop you onto intravenous antibiotics, which are the really potent ones, for about 5 days, and that works quite effectively. And it's the infection of the skin and the subcutaneous tissue. Now, this can happen on arms, but most commonly it happens on legs, specifically around about the calf area. That's normally where I see them, calf, ankle, foot area. And all it takes is a tiny little break in the skin. So you can have a piece of fingernail that just scratches you. You can be outside and maybe a cat or a dog scratches your skin, or you walk past a rose bush and a thorn scratches the skin. All you need is a break in your skin with this particular bacteria that enters there, and it triggers very, very quickly. I do see it more often in summer, and when people get stressed, often that is part of the things that trigger it as well. It's caused by a bacteria called Staphylococcus, and the source of the infection is often a wound of some kind. So it doesn't have to be a big cut. It can literally be a little scratch on the surface where you don't even see it. Then the next thing that they talk about is Lyme disease. Now, Lyme disease doesn't just affect the skin, it often affects the entire system, the entire body. And there's a very interesting YouTube clip with Liz, I can't think of her surname offhand, but Louis Smith had a talk at one of his events in the States. And she gave an amazing talk. I've actually kept it on my phone, but it is available on YouTube as well, on Lyme disease. And she's a fascinating speaker because she talks about preparing to die. She said she went off in a corner and she prepared to die. But she's got a fascinating story. Listen to it. If you can't find it, please let me know. I will find the link and I will send it to you, because I will encourage you to listen to it, because she's got some fascinating information over there. And this is a bacterial infection spread by deer tick bites. So we also get it here in South Africa. and Cindy from Cape Town, part of the Eagle team. I'll give you her name in a minute. Cindy Hapst. Her husband had Lyme disease, and Danya died. And if you're at Bloem, go and have a chat to her and ask her about it. I remember she gave a testimony about his story at one of the Bloemfontein. So it will be on CD somewhere, but go and have a chat to her, because it's not a fun disease to have. I do know two people that have got it, and this is not something that hits you and disappears after a short while, just by the way. Lyme disease can give you grief for a very, very, very long time. And the two people that I know with it are both currently overseas, and I get highly frustrated because I have sent them the story of Liz's story about how she overcame Lyme disease, and sadly, they're not interested in hearing more about it because they've had too many other conflicting stories thrown at them over the years. But anyway, that's for another story. So some of the signs and symptoms of Lyme disease: you have a bullseye rash or red circle with a lighter center, often very first presenting sign of the infection. Sorry, pardon me. It appears a few days to several weeks following the tick bite. And I can tell you that I have had tick bite fever on a few occasions. It's not a fun thing to have. First time I had it, I got a tick bite at the back of my head, and I think I was probably about 5 or 6 at the time, so I don't remember it too much, but my mom used to tell me about it. And subsequently, I've had a couple of other sessions of tick bite fever, but each one, fortunately, has been milder subsequently. You also have flu-like symptoms, fever and chills, and malaise, which is just a general weakness. And for people who've had COVID and had that terrible fatigue, that's malaise. You also have joint inflammation, so almost like a arthritis. And if untreated, it can lead to neurological and cardiovascular problems, as well as chronic arthritis. And to diagnose it correctly, you need a blood test that confirms the presence of that particular infection. Now, how does skin heal? Here's some relatively tame pictures, and I'm fortunate or unfortunate, I'm not too sure which way you'd like to look at it, in that I do get to see wounds in various different stages of healing. And it can be quite off-putting, I suppose, for the patient, because I'll look at a wound, and as I always say to them, from a medical perspective, this looks very good. From a patient perspective, this probably looks hideous, because some wounds can look really, really nasty, and especially deep wounds. So if somebody's had a cancer that's been cut out of their skin, for instance, like a melanoma, for instance, they will cut very deep and very wide. So you've got this huge, big wound, and it can stay like it for ages, and it doesn't seem to be healing. But as I tell people, your skin heals from the inside out. So imagine my hands are a wound, and it's healing there, but what you're seeing on the outside is still looks like a relatively big wound. And as it falls up, and then slowly but surely that wound gets smaller, and then it heals. And see if I can get my cursor over here, and you can maybe see it better. But you'll see there's this big, almost like a chasm. Think of a river cut between two cliffs, like maybe the Orange River, for instance, certain areas of that. And that whole area has to fill up. So all of this hollow needs to grow back together with new skin cells until you end up with your healed cell or your healed skin with scar tissue. Now, everyone has skin injuries from time to time, whether you scratch yourself on a rose thorn, whether you scratch yourself with your fingernails, whether your pet jumps on you and scratches you, whether you cut yourself in the kitchen, cut yourself shaving. Everybody has a skin injury at some stage. If the skin is punctured and the wound damages blood vessels, the wound fills with blood, and blood contains substances that cause clotting. The top part of the clot exposed to air hardens to form a scab, which is nature's own band-aid. It forms a barrier and prevents pathogens from entering. And again, we can see how so amazing this body of ours actually is. It's trying to heal and prevent problems all the time without us having to do anything about it or even concern ourselves about it. So you have a cut, you have a broken bone, instantly nature kicks in and starts taking over to heal. After this band-aid is formed, white blood cells enter and destroy any pathogens that may have slipped in. And while the fibroblasts come and begin, and fibroblasts are your little skin cells, come and begin pulling the edges of the wound together, the basal cell, which is your base layer of skin, hyperproduces cells for repair of the wound, very similar to bone. I did cover a bit of this last week, all the other fancy words like basal and dermis and epidermis, etc. If the wound is deep, scar, which is composed of collagen fibers, develops. Now, scars don't contain any accessory organs or nerve endings. Stitches, adhesive strips, otherwise known as butterflies, or special glue. The special glue, just by the way, is a form of superglue. And so I understand that is why and how superglue was invented. I understand it goes back to the Vietnam War, where they would give the guys little tubes of superglue to take out in the field with them. And should they end up with a big nasty wound where it wasn't always feasible to stitch, they could simply run the superglue down one side of the skin, pull it together and hold it together, and voila, one-time sealed skin. And often with children, if they cut themselves above the nose or above the eye, they don't like to put stitches in those areas, but they do use this special glue, which, as I said, is a form of superglue. And it works really, really well to hold everything together. Your wound ideally starts to heal from inside out. Pardon me. And this aids in preventing pathogens from becoming trapped between the healed surface and the deeper layer of skin, where they could develop into a pocket of infection. So you see how amazing your body is, because it takes care of all these things. You have a cut in your arm and you see all this red stuff pouring out, and immediately you go to cover it. And I'll let Jenny explain to you how to treat gaping wounds. But you cover it and stop the bleeding, and you would expect it to stay covered and to close up from the outside in. But it heals from the inside out for a very, very special reason. And that's where certain companies come in with the rather expensive dressings that we now put over on top of that wound, more, I think, to make the patient feel better than to actually heal the wound itself. Although a lot of those dressings, especially specialized dressings, assist with this wound healing. Burns is the next one that we're going to talk about. And burns, in my opinion, have to be one of the most horrible injuries out. And it can be caused by heat, chemicals, electricity, or radiation. And heat can include things like steam, as well as boiling water or boiling oil, or just plain fire. And the two factors affect the assessments of damage. That is the depth, because remember the skin is a few layers deep, and the amount of area damaged. So the depth of burn relates to layer or layers of skin affected by the burn. A first-degree burn damages only the outer layer or the epidermis. So technically, a sunburn, a mild sunburn when your skin goes a little bit red, is a first-degree burn. If you start to blister and goes a bit deeper, then you get the next degrees. So your first-degree burns include things like sunburn, And also for people who undergo radiation, often you'll end up with a first-degree burn on the skin, especially if there's a live radiation source involved. Symptoms include redness and pain, but it doesn't blister. The pain subsides in 2 to 3 days, and there is no scarring involved. Complete healing takes about 1 week. A second-degree burn involves the entire depth of the epidermis and a portion of the dermis. First, second layer. Symptoms include redness, pain, and blistering. And this you'll often get in things like steam burns and oil burns, and even fire burns for that matter. The extent of blistering is dependent on the depth of the burn. Blistering extends after the initial burn, and the blister, again, is your body's self-defense mechanism popping up a Band-Aid with a sterile solution underneath, which is why you're always told never pop a blister. Be it a burns blister, be it a blister because of friction, never pop a blister because that is a sterile dressing. Now, blisters heal within 10 to 14 days if there are no complications, meaning if they're popped, there could be complications, with deeper second-degree burns taking 1 to 3.5 months. And this again depends on the area of burn as well as the depth. Scarring in second-degree burns is common. Third-degree burns, which again in my opinion are the absolute worst, affect all 3 layers of skin. Surface of burn has a leathery feel and will range in color from black, brown, tan, red, or white. And sadly, I have seen all of these different types of burns, and I would not wish it on my worst enemy. The patient feels no pain because pain receptors are destroyed. And I always remember my father received some quite nasty burns one day. He was burning some garden rubbish, including paper, and suddenly a gust of wind popped up and flung these burning papers out and onto his arm and onto his leg. And he was jumping around, trying to put out the flames on his leg because that was what he could see and that was where it was most painful, and didn't realize that his arm had a piece of paper, burning paper, that had attached itself to him and was basically giving him, it was a 2nd to 3rd degree burn. It was only after it was cleaned up that he realized the extent of that burn, and he had a scar on his arm for the rest of his life. But he was more concerned about the burn on his leg, which faded after a fairly short period of time, than the one on his arm, which took quite a while to heal. The other problem with third-degree burns is they destroy the sweat and sebaceous glands, the hair follicles, and blood vessels. And if you can't sweat, you can't cool your body, and you end up with further complications. 4th-degree burns are the worst burns, and they penetrate bone and cause bone damage. And this will often end up in an amputation if you survive. There is a rule of 9s that is used to estimate the extent of area damaged by burns. And again, Jenny should be able to tell us about that because she would most likely lecture this in her first aid. So I don't want to get into all that technical stuff. I know there's a technical Tuesday, but I think that's just above and beyond what we actually need to know. And the next thing are your fingernails. And I often say to people, this is what fascinates me the most, because our body is made up of cells, trillions of cells. Yet, what tells those cells to stop being skin and become nail? What tells those cells not to glue themselves to the skin? Fascinating little body. And these are specialized epithelial cells that originate from the nail root to form nails. Now this is, please don't try this at home, a cross-section of your nail after you've chopped it with a very sharp knife in the kitchen. So there's your top of your bone, your phalanges, over there. There's your fatty layer, and there's your skin on the outside. There's the nail matrix, which is sterile, and the nail root becoming a cuticle, the nail bed, and the nail body. As the cells grow out and over the nail bed, they become keratinized, forming a substance similar to horns on a bull. The cuticle is a fold of tissue that covers the nail root. The portion that we see is called the nail body. This is the part that gets painted and gets whacked and all the rest. And nails normally grow about 1 millimeter every week. The pink color of nail comes from the vascularization of tissue under the nails, while the white half moon shaped area, or lunula, is a result of a thicker layer of cells at the base of the nails. Study your nails tonight, and you'll be able to pick up all these things. And I think that is where I'm going to stop now, because I know we are running out of time. We've got about 8 minutes left, but before I get into the next section, I'll stop there and open up so that if anybody's got any questions that they want to ask, please feel free to ask before I stop recording. Linda, unmute yourself, please. You muted? You muted? Linda, you muted? You muted.
Sorry. Scabies. What is the scientific name of scabies? You know, they say people that's
Yes.
not hygienic, good, and dirty, whatever. I've seen it when a little girl once.
Yes.
It was called scabies.
Yes,
very contagious.
We just know it as scabies because scabies is actually more of a mite that attacks the body. So it's almost like a little hair lice, something like that. And it's a little mite that attacks and leaves these red welts all over the skin. And as you say, very, very contagious because of the fact that it's almost like a live organism on the body. So they have to get sterilized and have special soaps and things like that to kill off those mites and to clean the skin up.
Do you think it's basically from people who live not very clean?
Correct. In a lot of cases, yes.
It flourishes, and it can easily flourish in an area like that.
Correct. And it then gets into your bedding, which then just becomes a knock-on effect. So if somebody's also sharing their bedding, they can also pick it up.
Yeah, or if you touch the clothing that they wear or whatever.
Correct.
So
Correct.
Horrible.
Not a fun thing because you scratch like mad.
Yeah, I've seen it once, and I was so in the person's house. And when I went out, I was so afraid that I couldn't remember whether I touched anything, or I was dead scared. Yeah,
you just hose everything down with care.
Little sores between the fingers.
Correct. Yeah, and it's very itchy and very uncomfortable.
Shame. Okay. Thank you, Sean.
Not a problem. Any other questions?